a lot of times as of late too, we've just been sitting down and seeing where the conversation goes. But today you were like, hey, what do you think about if we talk about Jermaine, you don't have to be a creep when you fix Caleb's mic. You can just walk up and fix it. I mean, see if you're watching us live, you see Jermaine's creepy hand come and fix Caleb's mic. But when Caleb, you were like probably given from last night, you're like, I think we should talk about a little bit about kids, raising kids, stuff like that. I thought that was a good idea because I know I'm nuanced before, but I like never officially said, but I've been working on a book and it's based off of a message that I've done before. So Divorce Proof is the book. So it's basically.
When's that release?
February of next year is the goal. That's what the goal. So I have a professional like publisher and publicist who's helping me write it. Basically, she's teaching me how to write because she feels that I may potentially, because of the content that I've shared, could get a really good book exposure and book deal. Suffice to say though, with the process as she's helped, because I'm not an author, and I just recently showed you guys that my parents found my report card from high school. And I had a 1.4 GPA at one point, and it was I'll share it one day or put in a message too. But it had all Fs, and so even though I am profoundly a thinker and I'm deep in a lot of ways, I've never been scholastically deep. And so even my theology professor in college, he used to say, "Man, Adam, if I could get you to write the way that you can talk." Like you could be a big influence. And he goes, but man, your writing's horrible. He goes, but when you talk, my gosh, I mean, like that, at least that's what he would say. And he'd be like,
punctuations and all that. It's all like the details that like is such a headache when it comes to writing. Like where do you put the semicolon?
And you being an English major, I'm sure it understands more to you and comes clear to you, but to me it doesn't.
No, I get it.
So when I'm writing and I'm framing a sentence and a thought and I read it back, it's like, man, that doesn't make any sense. That's not what I was trying to say. So basically I basically have a writing coach. She's helping me write, and she's also helping me how to intentionally write. But I say that to say is a lot of my book is because she has asked me, what do you wish was done differently for you growing up as a Christian in a Christian home? What do you think, whether it was conscious or unconscious of your parents, they always meant well, but like what kind of through your raising in church or in Christianity failed you to the point to be as wild and reckless as I was? Like and so she's making me like deep dive and relive stories with my mom or my dad, and she's making me relive girls that I was with and what I told them, and then she's making me realize church services I sat in as a child or a youth, and what that meant to me, and how come when they were talking about purity or a relationship with God, why didn't that settle in me? Because I think what she wants to do is not only we're going to talk about the theme of divorce proofing your future and your life, but also it's the fact that if, like you said, if you're a parent and you want to raise your kid in a Christian home, and you're saying, I don't know how to do it. And a lot of parents who raise their kids on Christian homes, they're going to say, well, I did it for the first time 30 years ago, and I didn't know what I was doing. And to be honest, I never figured it out.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
And it's fascinating with us because which is kind of what I want to get into as far as our differing experiences, because both of us have Christian intact homes, raised with mom and dad. Not we all have, but with intact mom and dad, no divorces or anything like that. But both of us had Christian parents, raised in a Christian home, and you were raised in a Muslim home.
And she was Muslim in the sense that maybe a Hispanic says that they were Catholic, right? Like it's like you say I'm Muslim, but you're not like
but
practicing or anything like that.
Never been to a mosque in my life, so yeah. But at the same time, I remember when I was pregnant with Ezra, my oldest, I remember looking to Nathan and I said, "So how do I parent as a Christian? Like, what do I do? Do we like wake up and read the Bible to get like what do I do? Like because all of a sudden it was a whole new world to me. Like I didn't know. I remember the first time Nathan said, okay, it's Easter. Like we have to get the kids Easter baskets. And I'm like, what are those? I have no, what do I put in an Easter basket? And then he said, "Well, just look."
And
at
you
the one
never
that-"
celebrated Christmas till you married Nathan?
No,
right?
not really. No, I mean, my parents, because I was just jealous of all the other kids. My parents said, like, "We'll get you a Christmas tree," and they got me one present, and it was a Mariah Carey CD. That I got to open like 2 weeks before Christmas, and then I had to wrap it back up and then open it up Christmas Eve because I just wanted to be a part of something.
Yeah.
And so during the holidays and all of my friends, and I grew up in a very Jewish neighborhood, so we had a lot of people who celebrated Hanukkah. So they got presents and all that stuff for Hanukkah. And then their parents also were not strict Jews. So then they also did the Christmas tree. So then these kids also celebrated Christmas and I got nothing.
Yeah.
So my parents were like, all right, we'll get you a tree, you know, and one
tree
Mariah
and
Carey
one present.
One CD.
Jeez.
And did you have a CD player is the question.
We had, listen, back in the, listen, here we go. Sanaz is ancient. Yeah, my parents bought a CD
You're almost
player.
50, right?
Yeah, no.
Adam Mesa.
I just wanted to just reach all generations on this podcast.
We bought one of those big CD players. It was like $800.
Oh yeah, the big one.
The CD player was $800. Yeah.
With the cassette player on the bottom.
Yeah, the two cassette players on the bottom, the CD player on the top, the radio in the middle. Yeah, and the bit.
Speakers on the side.
It was good.
Today we have back with us, we have my wife Ashlee jumping on the podcast with us. We have our sister-in-law Sanaz. You know, it's the four of us, the quad podcast that everyone seems to love.
Hey,
is when,
thanks for having us.
is when they're on with us. For a third time.
Was that a sincere
and then you got,
love?
Well, the people love you guys on it.
That wasn't from your sincere heart.
No, I don't think I have to do that on this podcast. You say people enjoy the four of us on the podcast. You got me and Caleb, the people's padre in the house, and then we got who's sitting today. I didn't even look to my left. We were just already talking. We got Jermaine with us.
Chelsea.
I don't even see. Oh, there's Chelsea.
Chelsea's there.
There you go.
Chelsea's in the back.
She's behind you.
I was eating a cookie.
She's in the black. She's black on black. So.
Yeah.
And black.
Just a floating head.
in the black chair.
And then we got Gabe on the as always on the ones and twos.
Gabe's hand.
Gabe's, and then we got some studio in the house. Hey, here's what I was thinking though. I think it would be cool because we talked about this before. So because you were in a thought, Caleb, and I want you to finish it. But I was thinking.
No, I don't. This is what happens when I try to do what you do. It's like forced.
You try to Gatsby?
No,
Yeah.
like when I try to like lead the discussion and stuff. You know?
Oh yeah. I mean, I thought
so
you were
we're
doing
going
great.
somewhere else.
I thought you were doing great.
Good.
No, you had a thought about why you wanted to talk about raising kids because you were okay. What you were saying was we grew up in Christian homes with both parents in our house. Ashlee grew up in a Christian home, both parents in her house, and I grew up in a Muslim home, but both parents in her house as well. Finish that thought. You didn't finish that.
Okay, so yeah, what I wanted to say was just like because a lot of people may think, oh, you were raised in a Christian home, so your parents were perfect. You know, so it's like, what are some of those misconceptions? And you refer to your book, especially our dad being a senior pastor of a church.
Yep.
You know, people think that he's perfect, and that people expect their children to be perfect, and we live under a microscope growing up as Christians in a church. And so, what are some of those misconceptions? And just what are some of those misconceptions? Kind of humanize our parents, maybe things that, and specifically applying to how you parent your kids. And I'm especially curious with you as far as, because I know you have a very close relationship with your dad. And so like, what were some of those, the positives that you grew up with your parents that
Baba June.
that you were able to, implement in your own life? And then what were also some of those areas where you're like, you know what, they didn't really do a good job with this. This is how I want to try to be better with my kids, you know?
So I don't know if that has anything to do with sort of a Christian standpoint or not a Christian standpoint, because like you said, there are no perfect parents. And as much as I go into parenting now as a Christian, I take a lot of the things that my parents did and not some of the things that my parents didn't do. It didn't have any type of basis other than, my parents did the best that they could with the circumstances that they had. I had immigrant parents that culturally, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, culturally, someone's phone. Pastor Caleb. Culturally, the family is really close. Like, we're very close. When I married my husband, that was hard for him because he had been raised in the church, and therefore there was always this need for boundaries. And so for him, he was like, y'all are too much in each other's business. And I'm sitting here going like, I don't understand what the problem is, because we should always be together, all of us, all the time, every day. Mm-hmm. The more the merrier. Anyone's welcome into my house. I will cook food for anybody. I will do. And he's like, oh, no. Like, this is my space, But when it comes to, and we've had those conversations when it comes to raising our kids, because I do want to create a house where people feel comfortable coming over, and my kids want to bring their friends over, and I have an open door policy with his friends and things like that, and I want to know who they are. And Nathan is a little bit more like, not everybody can come into this space because it's sacred to me. Like, our family is our family, and I get both sides, because we live in a world where we have to protect our family and our home. And I think him coming from the perspective of being the protector of our home, he wants to make sure that whatever comes in our house, it has been, tested, tried and true, that it is not going to, infiltrate our home. So raising my children as a Christian, I find it to be very similar to the way that my parents raised me, because I think a lot of non-Christians or especially immigrant parents, even their culture, if you are rooted in like a very strong culture, there's always going to be some type of a religious base that creates that culture. Persian culture, I always thought it was Persian culture. But when I was an adult and I would research it, a lot of the Persian culture came from religious culture. But we took sort of the religion out of it, but the principles were the same. Yeah. So I was raised with a lot of the similar principles of love, of family, of togetherness, of loving your neighbor, all of those things. But it wasn't necessarily tied to a particular religion and then being told that this is, this is the religion that you're supposed. Like the one time that you talked about the Muslim kids showing more Jesus than the Christian kids were, and things like that. So.
The one thing that I think is interesting, like just hearing you talk, and because obviously I was raised in that Christian home, and now I was reflecting on how my parents raised me and what I believe they did. Not to say that it's right or wrong, but I think that what my parents did and how I was obviously raised in the Christian home, raised with both my parents. They didn't tell us a lot of things. Anytime not until I was older did I find out this Bible study was marriage counseling that they were going to. They would go either, I forget, Tuesday or Thursday nights, and they said, hey, we're going out for a couple hours and we'll be back. And then I didn't find out until I was older that it was actual marriage counseling, that they were having struggles and they were having trials within their marriage. Do I say that's wrong? Now as a grown woman and married with kids, I don't think that was wrong. I think that they were doing what they thought was best in that situation to not have us have concerns as children and put that weight on us. Kind of like how you said there's certain things that you only allow your wife to take on, that they felt that they didn't need for us to take on that stress or anxiety or possible, is this my fault? Did I do this? As a child, to put it on us? Another thing that they did very well in the Christian home, which now I'm reflecting on and seeing, is they did have great community as a Christian couple, to where they were able to argue, the two of my parents could argue in front of these couples freely and take accountability. Maybe some more than others between my mom and my dad, but in that receiving of the accountability. But as I was raised in the Christian home, when it came to what they had to go through in order to make it, I think they did a great job. I think at protecting us as children and as protecting us in a Christian home to say like, hey, you will see arguments, you will see us maybe raise our voice, but to understand that's between your mother and I. It has nothing to do with you as children. And we're going to do it in the way that we can protect you. Now, some people, on the other hand, may say, well, that's secretive. Why are you being so secretive? Why can't you tell your children? Why can't you be honest and open? I think that they raised us the best that they knew how in that situation. So they knew that, like, hey, this is what's going to be best for us, and that the children do not know. Now, are there other things that they have done where they didn't tell us and we're like, you should have told us? Like, I would have wanted to be a part of that, or I would have known. Yeah, there's other instances. But when it came to their marriage, they did what was best, because I believe when their marriage was solid, then the family was solid.
I don't think that children belong in marital issues.
Yeah.
I really
agree.
don't.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any of the kids' business. There comes a point where I think once the child becomes an adult, that you can have real conversations about what marriage is supposed to look like and the reality of marriage. I remember when I started dating, I thought that every relationship was going to be blissful like my parents because they never fought in front of us, and they never and until my mom started to be like, oh no, there were years that I couldn't stand your dad, and I'm like, I never knew. And now I think that now I'm having a hard time dating because I didn't see the reality of it. But for children,
but like, how do you explain that then as you're dating and you have kids? Like, your kids see you in this perfect in their eyes, they're so jaded because they're young and naive, but they're seeing their parents like, oh, they've got a great marriage, they hug, they kiss. Our kids get grossed out when we kiss. Yes. But they love it because they say, we see this affection. How do we raise our children?
But I don't think every kid does. I mean, 50% of all marriages end in divorce. So I think probably half of people listening to us, or even sometimes maybe the majority of people, will say, I didn't grow up in a home where my parents were faking the funk. My parents showed me everything.
It's like a broken home.
I saw all of it. I saw the divorce. I saw the federal worker, the child protective services, and all this. That, like, it's like they saw all that. Some kids are talking to lawyers as early as 6, 7 years old to what does dad do? What does mom do? And so there is a lot of trauma based in that. And I think Christian marriages are the same. We have the same statistic, 50%. That's why, that is why I'm trying to, not me, but I'm just having thoughts and conversations of what does it take to have a godly home and what does it take to raise godly children, because Christian statistics are not really much different nowadays. So you're ending in divorce just like anyone else, or you're having marital affairs just like anyone. Children are having major familiar issues just like anyone else. And so what does it take to have a godly home, to raise a godly home? And I know we would know the biblical standard of it. We would know the scriptures behind it. But I think it's like you guys are wrestling out right now. Is it, at what age do you make your children privy of, if you are having a home where you hide your fighting and you do it all behind closed door? Like, at what time is it responsible to start teaching your children that the reality is this marriage that we've created in front of you guys is not really what a real relationship is? And then vice versa, what parents are out there that are showing their kids everything, throwing the pots and pans, cussing at each other, that they should probably wheel it back a little bit? And so I think that's where you have to, and then you move into, at the end of the day, it's this idea that you want to prepare your children for adulthood. And part of that, to me, is a successful relationship. Like, to me, that is, because more than likely, majority of our children will get in a relationship one day. And so if we prepared them for everything else but life of a relationship, life of a family, life of raising kids, it's like, sometimes I talk to my dad married. Oh yeah, me and your mom had that issue. And I'm like, well, I didn't know that. At some point, wisdom has to start, being passed down, and you have to start. And part of wisdom is giving children a level of autonomy to make mistakes. I think that's part of that idea, because I wasn't given autonomy, and I'm the rebellious type. You and Nathan aren't. You Caleb being my brother, Nathan being my oldest brother, you guys fall in, especially Nathan. Nathan loves systems, rules, boundaries. So when my parents said, here are the rules, here are the boundaries, like you can't date, you can't do this, you can't, Nathan's like, aye, Captain, and you're just very driven. So your passion was running. And so anything, you have an obsessive personality. So like you said before on the podcast, when you met your wife, you became obsessed, but for many years, that was not part of the equation. For
running
me,
was my girlfriend.
Yeah. That was your. That's who you had a relationship with, was running. And then for me though, I just have a rebellious spirit and heart. Like I have a Jacob spirit, which is like I just want to challenge everything and fight. So to me, it's like you have to make this clear to me if you want me to obey it. Like that's how I am about everything. Is I will do it all day if you could clarify to me, why can't I have a girlfriend at 16? If you could clarify for me, why I can't go to the mall and see my friends?
Right.
You got to clarify to me why. And then it's like you get older. Like my parents never let me go over to a friend's house. I never understood. And then as you get older, you're like, there are a lot of creeps out there.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm like, just tell me. Like sit me down and show me some statistics, or have me watch a documentary on how many bad things happen to people at other people's houses. And you even talk to therapists nowadays, that's what they say. Most therapists say the one thing I would never do is have someone, my child, sleep over someone's house that wasn't family or someone we considered family, because they were like, and even then they still say, like, because there's so much trauma that can happen. And so it's like, I'm like, oh, now I get why my parents did that. Like, while all the other, especially all the white kids in school, they're all spending the night at each other's house. They're all doing this and doing that. And even when I get in high school, they're all having like kickbacks on Friday nights and Saturday nights. My parents are always like, nope, you're not doing that. You're not this, you're not that. And then as I get older, I'm like, oh, it makes sense why, but we got to explain these things better. We got to talk about these things more. We had to. And I think it's like what you've shared earlier, we'll probably get to, is like the way that Mr. Rodgers used to talk is, to me, he would actually speak pretty clearly. Like he would talk to children actually pretty responsibly.
He did.
Yeah,
like adults.
He would talk to them like an adult.
Yeah, he didn't belittle them. He didn't. Hey, would you?
Yeah. But I think Christian parents, good boy. And a lot of Christian parents are doing it for the first time, or they're doing it for the second time from their parents, and maybe their parents did it wrong. I remember I recently had a conversation. Deanna's in here hanging in right now. I was talking to Jimmy recently, her husband, and he just made a comment to me. He just basically was like, I was asking him how he was doing something with his boys, and I said, why you let them do that or whatever? He said, I just don't want them, because he grew up in a very strict Christian home, like I did. And so he goes, I just don't want them to fake the funk around me, and I don't want them to feel like they have to lie to me to go do what they got to do. And I looked at him and I'm like, well, that's the current playing field that we're in. Either A, you're super strict, or B, you just don't know what you're doing. So you're just like, I just don't want them to be me. Yeah. I know what I did. It's like, and then you have Sanaz's parents who were kind of pretty open to a lot of stuff, right? Like you got to, I know this was also in like the 50s and the 60s, so it's a different era.
So
but
rude.
The
80s, thank you very much. A wonderful time.
But they gave you a lot.
You never saw the 80s.
No, I didn't.
You missed the best decade to be a child.
Did you watch Mister Rodgers growing up?
1,000,000%.
Okay, well then you are.
Mister Rodgers and Mister Rodgers' neighborhood with a little castle thing and the ding ding. Yeah.
You had a lot of freedom to do a lot of stuff, right?
I walked the neighborhood. I got to spend the night at my friend's house.
And you went to parties and kickbacks and
my parents. My parents were very much like, I had a very strict curfew. I really did, but they said we don't want you out in the streets, and I don't care about nobody else's kids. I only care about you. So you can bring anybody over if you want. So my house was the party house, and my parents would like just be in the bedroom, and I would this was before, but it was high school. If cars were in front of my house, teenagers that were driving by would just stop and come in. So I would have like 100 people in my house. Half of them I didn't know, just hanging out of my house. That's how I grew up because my parents were like, I don't care as long as you're good. So yeah, but I look back on that, I'm like, what?
What are you guys thinking?
This is your house.
You're right.
But
And your husband,
So
Nathan,
are you, looking back on it now though, do you appreciate that they gave you that freedom? That you have those memories? And
I would say it'd be a happy medium for the both of you because you can stretch Nathan as being the type A. Like that's where you guys both can play off of to where your kids aren't living the strict life because they totally could have.
Because that's really the debate in Christian parenting.
Like how strict, how much freedom do you give your children?
My daughter started listening to Nirvana, and I've been listening to Nirvana now because she's into it. So we listen to it in the car now. I'm thinking, okay, Nirvana, okay, but it's like, okay, when do you? Where do you put the boundaries on those? How do you put those boundaries up?
Matthias is
another thing my daughter is
EDM.
into is and
Matthias is like, he's like, and Matthias isn't into EDM. He wants to go to a rave, and we're like, what's the safest rave if we wanted to take him to? What would that look like? In our future,
he likes marshmallow.
Loves marshmallow. He wants to go.
I had a college roommate. She was a friend from high school. And so when I had one roommate moving out, she was coming to the college I was going to. She was just going to move in. She lived a very, very sheltered life to the point where she was childish.
Yeah.
She was almost like a 10-year-old, even though she was 18. And she moved into the house, and because she had never experienced freedom a day in her life, it's like she broke out of prison and lost her mind.
Wow.
She ended up becoming a waitress at one of those, like, she was like a shots girl that she would walk around and
like Coyote Ugly.
Yes. but she was so innocent. And like all of a sudden I felt like I had to be her parent because I knew what the real world looked like. She didn't. And I remember one time she got her phone stolen out of her car, and she ended up meeting the guy who stole her car, stole her phone to get her phone back and buy it from him in a parking lot by herself. I'm like, you're going to get yourself murdered.
Right.
Because you have not, you lived such a sheltered life. And I feel like when parents put so much restriction, there's one thing if you've got just the spirit of rebellion in you and you just want to rebel and you're going to do whatever you want. But then like you also have people like Nathan who are just like, aye, aye, Captain, and they follow all the rules. But then they get a taste of something they've never tasted before. And it's like, you ever see those kids on their first birthday who have never had cake?
Yeah.
And then they taste the frosting and then their entire face is in the cake? It's very much like that. They don't know how to control themselves.
Well, tell me about your experience, not to get too much into the nitty gritty, but your experience at Master's College, just with that, because Master's College, a lot of the girls there, raised in Christian homes, very sheltered.
Yeah.
So explain your experience when your encounters with them, just kind of how they.
Yeah, I mean,
when they met you and you were
yeah.
Hello, ladies.
Well, I had gotten out of a 4-year relationship, so I had then just deep dive back into, I'm just gonna wild out. I'm gonna do whatever I want, and so I was going to nightclubs and going down to USC and UCLA for fraternity parties, and I just wild. And so, and me and a couple friends, and we're all in Bible school or whatever, but we're just all wilding out together. And so, a lot of these girls that were at college that were really sheltered, they became when I was still trying. I mean, I was doing dumb stuff, but I wasn't doing inappropriate stuff in that sense with girls. But they were the ones that were kind of coursing me or encouraging it because they were almost like, I don't know another time. I know I'm going to get married right out of college because it's ring by spring. So it's like, I don't know another time that I'm going to live an unsheltered life. So they were just like, they would, if they knew of someone that was willing to be a little wild, I mean, they would just throw themselves at you. I remember one time I had one of my friends, he had told me that he was like in a class and part of it was like talking about your struggles. And so he talked about how he he struggles with girls and all these things like that. And then he goes to his dorm room later on that afternoon, and one of these girls that lived in a very sheltered home was just laying in his bed naked.
Wow.
And she was like, I want to lose my virginity to you. Like, heard him in class say what his struggles were, and then just was like, I want to lose my virginity. Like, they didn't even really know each other. They just went to class together.
Wow.
But it was this idea, and she said, my either her dad was a pastor or he's a deacon or something. And she was like, I've lived in such a sheltered home, sheltered environment that none of these other guys want to do it because they sheltered too, so they don't, and she's like, I heard your story because you're a Christian school, so you share your testimony, and there's very rare that there's guys in that level of school, Christian school, that have my testimony, which is like, I'm not a virgin, and I've had a lot of relationships, and I struggle with women, and that is my struggle. And it's like, so then a lot of the girls would perk up and be like, oh, this is where I could sow my wild oats with this guy, because you're still, I know,
I want to see what he's going to.
And then, and then I meet my wife, and she's at like one of the largest D1 universities, and they go into clubs and everything every night of the week and just wilding out. But at my school, in a Christian school, and everyone's very sheltered, and it's a very extreme Christian school in terms of religiousness, in terms of these girls were like, if they smell anyone who was willing to sow their wild oats with, I mean, they would, like that. And it wasn't good for a guy like me who already struggles with that, who already deals with that. And so I remember, here's where I had an epiphany, and this is where the person who's helping me write my book is helping me explore is because for many years, my dad would say on the pulpit, because we just didn't have a relationship where we talked about life. Now we do. Me and my dad could talk about anything. Because he was doing it for the first time too. He wasn't raised in a Christian home per se.
Yeah, right.
So when he's raising us, he's strict, and my mom definitely wasn't raised in a Christian home. She was living with guys since she was 16. So to them, they get saved, and they're like, oh, this is what you do. You prevent your children from anything you did when you were younger by basically wrapping them, throwing them in a closet. It's like, that's what they think. So people, I think a lot of times in the church, people have to realize what generation of a believer, a Christian are you in terms of what you were raised, because most of those first generation believers are going to be very strict and then the kind of second, third, or whatever generation is going to be like the conversations me and Jimmy had, which was, I just don't want to make the same mistakes that my parents made, even though they're not really mistakes. There were errors in kind of how they were trying to protect me, right? And so what I was exploring with because there was a point when I was in college and I was caught with a girl, and it turns out it was the granddaughter of the university's largest donor, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that at the time. And so, I'm caught with this girl, and so I have to, part of the rule was, part of the disciplinary in the Christian school was that I had to tell my dad what I did. That's part of the.
Wait. That's in their hand. That's in like their.
It's
handbook?
it's in the disciplinary. You got to do whatever they tell you in order to.
How do you even prove that? Like how do you do you like record it?
I'm
like how do they know that?
Well, they tell you if they have to call your parent, they will.
Oh, you have to do it in person? Oh.
Well, I have to go do it in person, not with the dean there, but basically they say if me reporting back sounds questionable, then they will call our parents and double check and make sure. So they're just kind of evaluating based off what they feel is your honesty. So I just figured, because you are there for the right reasons. So I mean, it's not like I've ever had like an uncontrite hardened heart that I was like, man, forget God, forget this. I mean, I'm in Bible school, so I want to do what's right. I want to get back on track. So I'm like, I'm 22 now. I lost my virginity at like 14 or 15. So this is like a good 7-8 years after I've already lost my virginity. And since that time, my dad had still always been on the pulpit and said, all 3 of my boys are virgins, know? And so I'm thinking to myself, like,
and to this day, he says True Love Waits was really beneficial for you.
Yeah. And I just said this. I actually just did True Love Waits for the teenagers last night. And I said, actually, I never and that's why we've changed it, because normally in a true love weight setting in churches, you do like a purity ring commitment. And I've actually banned our team from doing that, because even when I met Ashlee, she had lost her virginity and she had a purity ring, and she slowly took it off, and it went from the side of the table because she would feel disgusting when she would look at it, and then it went into her table because it was this idea that like, you know, like you got married to God and you now cheated on him. You know, it's like, it's so even by the time I was old enough to go to True Love Weights, I never did the purity ring ceremony because I wasn't even pure by the time I got to it. So, and they would tell you, well, you could do it now. And I'm like, no, because I know I'm probably going to do something again tomorrow, because to me, it was all about hellfire and brimstone. It's all about like, God hates you when you do these acts, you know? And here's where I'm saying I had an epiphany, is that I'm 22. I'm thinking of my life, of my dad, how he always talked about sexuality, how he always talked about his kids being virgin. I'm like, man, my dad's going to be so disappointed. He's going to be so mad at me. He's going to be so embarrassed by me. Like, those were all the, because I just know what he had said in the pulpit and what other stuff he had said. We had never really had a one-on-one conversation up until that point about what I've been doing or whatever. So in that moment, I go drive to my dad's house. I'm not even attending Abundant Living at that time. So I'm going to a church in LA. And so I sit down with him like, hey, Dad, you know, I made a mistake. In Bible school or whatever, and I got caught with a girl, and I tell him the whole thing, right? Kind of crying a little bit because I'm embarrassed as your dad, Christian home. And he looks at me, and then he just says, you know what, Adam? He's like, David was known after a man after God's own heart, and David had an affair with Bathsheba. And God still, because of David's contrite heart, because David was willing to repent. He said, because David was really willing to respond and react to his decision and turn to God, God still at the end of his life still considered David a man after his heart. And so he said, it's never too late for you to run after God's heart. God loves you. The buildup that I had in my head of how he was going to react was not what he did.
Yeah.
And he gave me a big hug, and he was like, don't let this disqualify you. Don't let this tell you you don't belong in Bible school. Don't let this tell you that you don't belong in ministry. Don't let this tell. He goes, it's how you respond when you make your error that matters, and how you respond to the Lord when the Lord speaks to you when you know you made an error. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, well, dang, if you would have told me this at 15, 16, I think I would have avoided a lot of decisions, because I just always had this picture in my head that I was already headed to hell.
Why not?
Like what?
So do you think like a lot of parents, where they make the mistake is really just the hypocrisy of, you know, they teach the Bible and they teach and they try to tell their kids about Jesus and his love and his mercy and the Father's grace and all these things, but at the same time they want their kids to live as holy as possible, that they put these like restrictions with the hopes that they, you know, go the right way. But what ends up happening is the kid is so afraid to come to their parents that they, you know, maybe they do things in secret, whereas you wish, like you're saying, if they had just had the open communication of like, look, I want to protect you from the hurt that these actions are going to cause for you. But if you do, you can come and talk to me. But that's not what a lot of parents do.
So that leads into a Mister Rodgers segment. Part of what we want to do is get some wisdom from Mister Rodgers, because he's going to be directing this conversation. So hold that thought, because it connects with this video. And then we'll discuss that thought. So this is the video, Gabe, where he
Caleb
talks
introed
about
that like Oprah.
That was beautiful.
Where he talks about apologizing to his grandchild.
Many people have asked me, do you ever get mad? And of course I answer, well, yes. Everyone gets mad sometimes. The important thing is what we do with the mad that we feel in life. A few weeks ago, on my way home from a particularly tough day at work, I stopped to see my two grandsons. Their mom and dad weren't there, but the boys were there with the babysitter in the backyard, squirting water with hoses. I could see that they were really having fun. but I felt I needed to let them know that I didn't want to be squirted. So I told them so. And little by little, I could feel that the older boy, Alexander, was testing the limit until finally his hose was squirting very close to where I was standing. I said to him in my harshest voice, "Okay, that's it, Alexander. Turn off the water. You've had it." He did as I told him, said he was sorry, and looked very sad. The more I thought about it, the sadder I got. I realized that Alexander had not squirted me, and that I had stepped into his and his brother's play with a lot of feelings left over from work. So when I got home, I just called Alexander on the phone. I told him I felt awful about my visit with him. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was taking out my anger from work on him. I told him I was really sorry. Do you know how he answered me? He said, "Oh, Bubba," he calls me Bubba. "Oh, Bubba, everybody makes mistakes sometimes." I nearly cried. I was so touched by his naturally generous heart. And I realized that if I hadn't called him, I might not have ever received that wonderful gift of Alexander's sweet forgiveness.
I love him so much.
Because I think one of the things that fathers, mainly fathers, but even parents in general, they have a hard time asking for forgiveness towards their children. You know, when we make mistakes, when we yell, when we let our anger get the better of us around our kids, there's what is it within us that is so hard to just humble ourselves and say, "You know what, Judah, I shouldn't have responded like that. Could you please forgive me? That was rude, and I lost my temper, and I shouldn't have." I mean, I've done that a lot with my two boys, because especially when they go crazy, they get in that play zone. And he was talking, they get in that play zone, and they do something, throw something at your head, or you tell them to be quiet 5 times, and then they're still playing, and then you go into high gear and you start really going at them. And then you feel bad, you feel guilty. Well, I think a lot of parents just will forget about it. They'll just choose to forget about it and just go in another room, or as opposed to going to their child and saying, "You know what, I apologize.
Yeah.
This was wrong." And that, if we do more of that, that's going to create that atmosphere of safety that our kids can come to us with their issues, with their sins, with their vulnerabilities.
What's so crazy, Matthias, didn't even tell you this yesterday, for the first time out of his mouth ever was yesterday. And I had taken something from him, and he goes, "But Mommy, sharing is caring." I've never heard this come out of his mouth, but the part that stuck out the most, like this was the forgiveness, was the caring. And so he, at 4 years old, is understanding what care means. So if Adam and I are not caring, he understands sharing is caring. There's a care part to it, to share. You care about me if you're sharing. So when he said it, and then he said it this morning again to me, and I'm like, "Kid, what are you, like, only 2 times, yesterday and today." I'm like, this is so interesting to see my 4-year-old getting the concept. But our kids are Thomas, even at his young age, he'll do something that will either frustrate us, and Adam and I will say no. Immediately, his response is to come to the person who did the disciplinary and want to hug, kiss, or love, because he's so upset that we're upset with him.
That happened yesterday with Matthias. And I was in a sound booth with him, and he was eating popcorn, and he was spilling it everywhere. And I wasn't even mad. He said, "Oh, man, you spilled it on the floor." He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Chelsea." And I got kind of emotional, because I'm like, I'm not mad. I'm just acknowledging you spilled popcorn on the floor. But to your point, he so freely gave away and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I think if we can, as adults, adopt freely giving away and I'm sorry or forgive me,
that's good.
And it becomes more a part of our natural language, just a conversation, I think our kids, I mean, your guys' kids, because I don't have any, would learn from.
Everybody's around raising our kids.
I worked on that concept. It was something that I was very aware of, that every once in a while I just get so, like he said, I'm overwhelmed with all the things that sometimes I just lash out at the kids. And there are moments where I'm like, I went too far. Like that they didn't deserve that. I could have totally did it a different way.
Yeah.
And where I struggle, because I've worked really hard on those individual moments where I will go and have one-on-one. I'll sit on the couch or I'll sit on the bed with Ezra and be like, Ezra, I am really sorry. You know, I am tired and I did this. But then where I struggle is I will follow it up with, it's just that when you did this, and I'm still blaming him for making me upset when it's not his fault. He's a kid. And I have a lot of guilt about that sometimes because there are moments where I'm just like, I didn't need to, that did not constitute me yelling the way that I did.
And I think it goes into a great conversation, obviously, in the reflection. So obviously, single parents, it's the reflection that you would have within yourself to have that patience, to have that time to reflect on how your kids are responding to you. If they're standoffish, obviously, it could possibly be us. But I know when having the conversation with Adam, before 2023 hit, I said, as I asked him, I don't know if you remember this, I asked him and I said, how can I be better as a mother to your children? And it was a hard conversation because he gave a simple answer. He said, let the boys be boys.
Yeah.
Let the boys be boys. If they want to jump off the couch for a little bit and get all their goofies out, play with them, entertain with them. But then also, we know, Ashlee, you're going to discipline them and they know you're strict, but they also have to know that their mom's going to allow a little give. Because if you're always so strict, they're never going to want to play with you. And it's always going to be either him or, I mean, am I wrong with that?
No, yeah. I mean, that's what we talked about. And I think when I come to my sons is that what I try to do is like, I don't ever want them to be scared of their dad. Cause we grew up with so many rules. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I was pretty scared of dad on a regular basis.
He never showed any weakness.
Yeah.
So he was like this perfect godlike figure.
Yeah.
And he
just
never,
always,
there were never no deep conversations about like, hey, when I was this age, there was never any of that. He was like, he was like perfect to us.
Yeah.
He never showed weakness.
Yeah. And so for me, and I was the hyperactive one and had, ADHD that would later get, clinically given and stuff like that. So I felt like my parents hated me. I thought that they would, if you or Nathan riled me up, I was the one always getting in trouble. They would kick me out of the car on normal occasions. Do you remember that? They say, get out of the car, and they'd leave for 10 minutes. Yeah. And I'd walk on the side of the street.
And your mom got scared because you ran.
I actually went. I went in a bush and I hid. And when they came back, and they're parked there, and I'm like Macaulay Culkin in that way, watch home, Macaulay, that's how I felt, and so it was for me. I'm like, I see so much of me in my boys that I'm like, I don't want them to grow up thinking that they can never come to me or that relationship isn't there, that we can have conversations of what you think doesn't matter to a 12-year-old. It matters for their world. It matters for what they're going through. Yeah. So I would hear a lot like, my grandma would tell me that you're just 13, you're just sick. What do you need a girlfriend for? You're just 16. And I make jokes of that still with young people sometimes. But if I'm talking to them one-on-one, like it does matter. If you're 16 and 15 and you feel like you're in love or you feel like
those hormones
it matters,
are raging.
And so I never felt like any of that stuff mattered. So when I'm disciplining the boys, which I do discipline them, I discipline them around character things. I discipline them around attitudes that I don't want to reinforce. What I don't discipline them on is being too loud or throwing something on accident. Or Thomas recently, he woke up and he thought it'd be funny to grab my face and he did a big scratch. And a lot of parents I know, they would spank or you don't do that, don't scratch me. In his head, he thought he was having fun. In his head, he thought. And to me, I'm like, in that moment, I'm like, this is not something that's worth disciplining because this is not a character thing. This is not an attitude thing. It was an accident, you know? And I have to do the same with them. I have to say, hey, sorry, son, this was an accident. I mean, a lot of people do say that with our boys that they're very, especially Matthias, who's a little older, he's almost 5, that they use words like, excuse me, I'm sorry. And you know, just stuff. They use a lot of,
gestures.
Good word, you know, words that are very, but it's because we use them back to them, you know. So like if I say, hey, Matthias, go get me that cup, he brings it, I say, thank you, son. You know, like, but a lot of parents, they say, go take the trash out, and then they come back and they don't say anything. Well, that's what you need to do. No, I'll say like, when he gets older, it's like, hey, thank you for taking the trash out, son. Thank you. Because you would do that to an adult. You do that to another adult.
That's a great point.
And a lot of marriages don't work because you also lose respect for each other, and you don't use words like please and thank you anymore. You don't show appreciation, but you would to anyone else. You know, you would. That's and good. So to him, I try to do the same thing. Son, would you please take this away? Hey, son, would you allow me to take your shoes off? You know, like and sometimes I'll joke, boy, get over here. And he knows that what the different of those voices are. But for me, it's like, I just want to create a space where he can share his greatest wins with me, but he can also share his greatest losses with me. And I think that's where the Christian home kind of errs, is because we've understood the gospel as God is forgiving and you can always bring your sin to God. Well, if I'm going to be a reflective parent of that, then I have to create an atmosphere where they can bring anything to me, and I'm going to respond the way that the Father, God, would respond in a loving, gracious way, or a disciplinary way if needs to be. But there has to be that clarity to say, hey, you could bring anything to me, because I always tell parents when I talk to them, they're like, oh, no, I don't need to go to that because not my kids. My kids don't. Sometimes I'll talk to parents, they'll be like, my kids don't listen to secular music. And I'm like, that's what you think. Now, they may genuinely not. You know, you may get a rare instance of a Caleb or Nathan, but me just being in youth ministry for so long that I was,
90% do.
90% of parents who thought that their kids were one way
I know all
were
the bad
not.
songs. And we weren't allowed to listen to the radio, and I knew every song.
Well, I remember specifically as a youth pastor, I had there were 2 girls that were dating, and we had a conversation with their parents because they were caught multiple times. It was just whatever, they were fooling around. And so I'm sitting to one parent, and one parent's like, this shouldn't happen. The other one, even though the daughter is admitting it, the other parent's like, no, it's just not true. It like just literally, she's just still denying it. And I'm like, listen, like we caught your daughter with another girl and blah, 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 blah. And the daughter's sitting there. She's like, I'm sorry, Mom. And she's literally telling her daughter, just be quiet. I know that's not you. You didn't do nothing. Stop. You didn't do anything.
Okay.
And she had sold herself on this like obliviousness.
Delusion.
When her daughter's even there going like, hey, I'm sorry. Like, no, you're not doing it. You didn't do anything wrong. That's your friend. Wow. You know, and I'm like, what is going on? You know, 2023 as a youth pastor go, whoa, like, what do I do when a parent completely disregards, what their child is going through or what happened? And believe it or not, I would see that with a lot of parents. And then when they finally had enough, or when they caught their child doing something they didn't want them to, now all of a sudden it's my fault as the youth pastor. Why didn't you prevent this? I'm like, we've been asking you to take them and engage them in things, but you said you got this. You said that you have rules in your house and da-da-da-da-da. And I was telling you that your student wasn't listening to those rules. I was telling you that the student was exhibiting some things, that I caught them with a boyfriend or girlfriend. You told me that's not true because you don't let dating in your household. Like... So it's like this idea that even this blindness factor, right? So I think with the boys, what I want to do is this balance of structure and godliness and holiness, while also saying, hey, dad isn't even perfect. So you're not, here's what dad does when he sins. I go to Christ. I go to the cross. I go broken before the Lord. I do, showing them how my walk with God is improved, how I process my relationship with the Lord. That I need to show my sons, to say, you can do that with God, but you can also do that with me, in the sense that I can't forgive your sins, but I can help you walk through this life with you so that you don't feel like you're doing it alone. I felt like I was doing all this the first time, where I don't think, I don't think I didn't really start getting, where I felt like people were talking to me as a human being that were adults. I didn't feel like I started getting that until my mid-20s. No. Like no one, that was an adult,
is
I
what I'm saying.
I was listening to a podcast this morning actually about parenting, and this, it was this guy, he's a father, a couple kids, and he said something that was wild that I wish was enforced. My parents did a great job at raising us. I don't know if it's a black thing either, where it's just we don't really have a ton of one-on-one conversations within the house. It's kind of you sweep it on the rug, keep it pushing, you alive, we good, out of sight, out of mind. So I think it's cultural as well, what I experienced. But he said this. He said, I come to my son when he was like 12, 13. He said, man, son, you're one day going to be put in situations where you're going to need a collab partner, somebody to collab with, somebody to just think through stuff with. He said, I'm not going to tell you everything you need to do, but I will collab in how you can think about certain things. And so he said, one day my son came up to me. He said, Dad, I need to collab with you on something I'm dealing with. And he said, man, he is the one that initiated the collaboration. So he's creating an environment and a space where his son is okay just collaborating thoughts. If that was enforced, just an environment where my parents made it feel safe that I can talk. And not that they created a hazardous environment. It wasn't that. But there was just no environment of conversation. So for me,
So
I'm
I do something.
Right.
I do something very simple with my kids. Every single day when I pick them up from school and we're driving home from school, we do the peak and the pit. And that is, tell me the peak of your day and the pit of your day. Some people call it a rose and a thorn or a best and a worst, whatever it is. But they're 8 and 5. And just in the short time that we've been doing it, because we've been doing it for about 3 months now. But we do it every day. Now they get in the car and they go peek and pit, and so they want to tell me their biggest win of the day and their worst part of the day. And sometimes they've got 3 wins and 3, pits, whatever. But I have seen such a difference just in the fact that there's a space where they can tell me where their challenges are every single day. And they know they're going to be able to share with me things that they struggle with, and then they get to also tell me things that we get to celebrate. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get them to understand that this is how you communicate. You should be able to, at some point, tell me what's been going on in your life in a way. It's just teaching them verbal communication in a way of tell me your feelings.
And I think that, gosh, that's the lack of conversation, going back to Chelsea, going back to that, it's like we need to do better at speaking to our children like they're adults, like they're our peers.
For sure.
And not belittle them, not, be condescending. One of the things that I'm doing, I'm building a man cave in my garage, and I'm putting a pool table, I'm putting a ping pong, and I'm putting a dartboard. And that's all just for my kids to invite them out there, play a game of pool, play a game of ping pong, and have that be the spot where I talk to them on my level, as an adult, as a, not condescending towards them, not disciplining them. But that's a new thing that I'm trying to implement because my dad never really did that. He never spoke to us as adults. We never had real authentic.
And he's publicly on the pulpit said that kind of
conversations like that. So, but I say that to say is I get that from Dad and I get that from Grandpa, where it's really hard to just initiate conversation and to just talk and communicate. And that's ironic because I'm doing this podcast and stuff, and I love talking to people and stuff, but that's not my nature. My default is just that's what I did running. It was just I hated running with people. I just wanted to be by myself for an hour
Yeah.
I didn't want music in my ears.
Yeah.
That's why I hate going to gyms.
Yeah.
Just get away from. I just want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And just meditate. And but so that's something that I'm trying to do to get better at. And I think
I think for
talking?
Matthias. So when we were talking about like just how you're trying to raise your kid and how to not be so strict and how to allow them to be them, Adam and I we've had plenty of conversations about my kids this year, just because like I said, I'm very much the disciplinary. I want my kids to be respectful. I want them to be kind. I make sure whenever they're in a room, they greet their elders. They have to speak. And now a lot of people are the opposite, and they're like, my kid doesn't have to say hi to everybody, which is fine. You raise your kid how you want to raise your kids. But for me, I've become very protective because Adam and I are in this church atmosphere, and people always are already going to put a stigma on my kids as the pastor's kid. Oh, look at how they're acting. Look at how they're behaving. I wonder if they get away with this at home. And I had
it's a magnifying glass that's tainted because they don't put that expectation on other kids, but they'll put them on yours.
And the sad part about that is I had to remind myself, and the Holy Spirit to remind me that my kids didn't ask for this. My kids didn't say, hey, God, I want to be born to Ashlee and Adam so I can be a pastor's kid. They are put into this situation, obviously being our kids, and their sacrifices my kids have had to make. Being a pastor's kids, they're here hours on end. They're having to go to children's church. They're being told without being told, be a leader. And those are things Adam and I have implemented within them to be respectful. Now, are they going to be perfect? Never. Are they going to make mistakes? Absolutely. They're kids. So how are we as adults and just individuals going to love on the kid, like Adam and you guys have said, to be able to make those spaces or those mistakes and you make a safe place? My kids love this church. My kids think Chelsea, Jermaine, Pastor Ryan, those are their friends. Whenever they come here on this, they go, I want to see my friends. Yesterday he came in, he goes, okay, Mom, I'm going to see my friends. Literally leaves me and goes and hangs out with them because I want him to also have an atmosphere where he can build these relationships and they treat him, they don't speak baby to him. They treat him like he is 8, 9 years old and talk to him and respect conversations. But I think it's the atmosphere that that Adam and I have set of this is how we treat our kids and you see how we treat our kids. So please don't treat our kids any differently. You don't see us doing, oh, Matthias, you're such a good little boy. Oh, well, here's a candy. Here's this. What's going to make you? We don't do those things. We treat our kids as such. There's disciplinary when, like Adam says, when it comes to the character part. And that's, if my kid is acting out of character, which he has before, where he stuck his tongue out or he rolls his eyes like his mama, we need to fix that because those are things that he's seeing from his mother where I have to remind myself, hey, watch your face, watch how you're acting because your kids are going to do what you're doing. But that's not to say that falls on him. That's my responsibility as a mother because he's only viewing what mommy's doing that I can do. So Adam and I have made a joke now because Matthias will do it in the house and he'll literally look at me and I'll look at him and he'll be like, and I'm like, oh, don't go there. So there's conversations that we have to have, but it's giving that room for our kids to be able to make mistakes. It's giving that room to say they are kids. Kids until they leave your house, until 18 years old, they are kids. They are our responsibility. They are our God-given gift to uphold, to uplift, to shepherd, and they're going to make mistakes, and we have to be okay with it. But it's have to be okay with, like you said, like Chelsea said, how let me collab with you. Let me make this something fun that we can do. Let me make this an honest, open peek in a pit.
And even what Pastor Diego did with you, Pastor Adam, and when you came to him and you had all of this narrative of how you would respond, I think, which shout out to Jack Bayham. I have the best dad. I really do. But not that I was able to get away with a lot of stuff, but I knew when I first came to my dad with something that I did, I knew how he responded, and it made me feel safe to be able to go to him and no, I'm still going to be disciplined, but you're not about to scare me. You're not going to harass, none of that. So I think how we're responding, or how you guys, because again, I'm not a parent, but the first response to something big. Because I think with kids, it's like, yeah, I can go to my mom and dad about a friend was being mean, or I said something wrong, but man, I had sex, or man, I went drinking. So it's really, I had a fear at a young age of what can I bring? I know I can bring this, but can I bring that?
I remember being, I remember being 18 or 19 or something like that. And I was out in the streets. And I remember calling my mom to come and pick me up because I was drinking. And I remember being so nervous to call my mom. And the first thing she said to me was, "Thank you for being responsible and calling me."
Yeah, that's good.
And then she grounded me. But I will always remember her first response of like, "I'm on my way. Thank you for thank you for that."
Right. Sure.
You know, and then on the way home being like,
absolutely,
listen, what you did was irresponsible. And we're going to make sure that doesn't happen again. But you did the right thing by calling me.
That's huge.
It's the communication. Y'all right there, buddy?
Let's get another wisdom clip from Mister Rodgers. See where that takes us.
The toughest thing is to love somebody who has done something mean to you, especially when that somebody has been yourself. Have you ever done anything mean to yourself? Well, it's very important to look inside yourself and find that loving part of you. That's the part that you must take good care of and never be mean to, because that's the part of you that allows you to love your neighbor. And your neighbor is anyone you happen to be with at any time of your life. Respecting and loving your neighbor can give everybody a good feeling.
Are you crying?
No, my contact is actually.
It's a contact. Okay.
I have no problem admitting if I'm crying. But my contact.
Mr. Rodgers is preaching. I just was teaching to our UCA students this morning about this concept. I was asked to speak on social intelligence and communication, empathy, forgiveness, all that stuff. And I told them, I said, whoever is telling you guys, just love your neighbor, love your neighbor, but has not first taught you how to love yourself, you can't give what you don't have. So that's the concept that I taught, which is, I should have just played this video because that was my whole 30 minutes and 30 seconds, but that's huge.
Yeah.
Do you, I posed a question to them. Have you forgiven yourself? Have you loved yourself? Because I wouldn't expect you to give that to your neighbor if you don't first know how to do that with you. And I said I got kind of emotional with myself during that time. But anyways, love Mr. Rodgers. That was great.
Yeah, I try to look with my kids how the fruit of the Spirit manifests in each one, and there are certain fruits of the Spirit that are more dominant in Ariel and more dominant in Judah, more dominant in Silas. So Judah is a very protective person. He's very very protective person. So he's the first one to go catch our dog when she's running around the neighborhood, and he's like crying, freaking out, and getting mad at Silas for letting the door out and yelling at him, and then so argument arose between Ariel and Judah the other day, and Ariel is talking to him about whatever they were talking about, but in correcting them, and they got into a little fight, brother-sister fight, but in correcting them, I've just becoming more mindful in my correction to affirm that fruit of the Spirit that's causing them to be upset
because you're so protective,
because
you're so
of what
passionate. Yeah.
So I told Ariel, Ariel, you're very empathetic. You feel other people's pains. Oh yeah, that's what happened. Was Judah was going at it with Silas, making fun of him, and then Ariel stood up for Silas, and then she went at it with Judah and now they're both going at it. So, and it just blew up. It was like World War III. But, in correcting Ariel, I said, Ariel, it's okay, because it's okay that you feel this way, that you want to defend Silas, because you're very empathetic. You feel that criticism towards Silas, and so you wanted to defend him. But that's not your place. You're not his mother. You're not Judah's mother. You're not Judah's parent. So when you see that next time, come to me or mom, and we will parent and we will discipline Judah for saying what he said to Silas. So that's what I become more mindful of when I'm disciplining and correcting my kids, to first emphasize that fruit of the Spirit within them, and then back it with the correction.
That's really good.
Yeah, I think that's what just be mindful is having the real, like, to me, watching that Mister Rodgers, like, that's really deep what he was sharing, and the average kids who's watching that is 6, 7, 8. And now Mr. Rodgers is a great influence, but no greater influence is that of a parent in the home. And so, you know, I would tell many parents, you go watch Mr. Rodgers and consolidate what he's saying, and take those tips rather than, you know, just a child watching a Mr. Rodgers video or anything like that. It's like
Parents
go
need
and
to watch Mr. Rodgers.
watch him and then take that heart of communication. And I think for me, like, just how I'm evaluating as my kids get older is there's a lot of ways that I could evaluate if what I'm doing is doing a good job. But two of the things that I'm personally going to evaluate and weigh is that I want them, as they get older, number one, that they have a relationship with the Lord. So that is going to be one of my defining factors on. Now, there's a lot of outside stuff, and it's also their decision, but parents do have a weight on their children, and have a weight on, you know, train your child up in the way that they should go. And when they get older, they won't depart from it. And so I think, and then what I want them to succeed in relationships. I want them to have successful relationships. Specifically, if they get married one day, I want them to have a successful marriages, because for most adults I know, the greatest hell that they ever go through is a bad marriage. You know, like, I know a lot of adults who they lose jobs and they get through it. I know a lot of adults who they get injured and they get through it. I know a lot of adults that they may experience someone's passing and they get through it. But I also know a lot of adults who go through marriage hell and they don't get through it. It just ruins everything about them. And right now, statistically, that's pretty much 50% of all relationships are ending. So for me, I'm like, I want them to have successful relationships, and I want them to succeed in relationship. And so part of my raising them and discipling them is not only for the Lord. I want them to be believers one day, and that's one of my weights of how did dad do a good job, but also, are they succeeding in the way they communicate with relationships? Are they succeeding in the way they communicate their emotions and their feelings? And how did their mother and father, me and Ashlee, have a part to play in them being successful in their relationships, and them being successful in their identity, in who they are? Are they weighed easily by the world? Are they easily want to be impressive towards the world? And I think that's one of the aspects that our mom and dad did do great, was they showed, you know, me, you, and Nathan are believers today, partly because we really saw an authentic relationship with the Lord in their life.
Yeah, you know, and just the church community was, you know, spiritual mothers, surrounded by spiritual mothers, spiritual fathers, mentors, figures, you know, people in the church that we were constantly surrounded by, who we were forced to learn how to interact with people of all generations, all demographics, all races. And that's one of the huge benefits of being raising your children in a church, being in a church, is you're exposed to people. And we had a really healthy, all across the spectrum.
We had a really healthy church setting. So it wasn't weird stuff, and there wasn't fake stuff. And it was like, mom and dad let us be us. So if we wanted to have Pokemon cards and we wanted to skateboard, they let that stuff happen. So where there were strict rules.
We had a lot of freedom where a lot of our Christian friends didn't have. You know, so they definitely, I felt like they had a good middle ground. The one thing that I think was the error was, we referred it to in the past, but just like, dad was so afraid that we would knock up a girl. Or it was almost like girls were anathema, and not having sisters, only having our mom to interact with as the only female. I think me and Nathan in particular, not you, but me and Nathan, went into our 20s not really knowing how to interact with women.
I gave you guys all your relationship advice.
Yeah,
Nathan's 5 years older than me. You're 2 years older than me. When you guys got in your relationships, you would come to me and be like, "Hey, how do I date her? How do I?" And I'm like your guys' dad.
Like he made it to where like we couldn't even have friends that were girls, and that's how kind of strict his mindset was, and so that kind of stunted us. But apart from that, every other aspect of surrounding us with community and
to me, it solidified my relationship with God. It solidified my relationship with the Lord. What I lacked was seeing how life and faith played in the real world. And so, their love for God and our dad's desire for God really made me love God, and ultimately, led me to my faith in Christ, seeing it exhibited through their lives. Me then getting married and also dating, like, had no idea what I was doing, was because no one would talk to me about it. No one would share anything about it. And then if it was like, if I was 21 and had a girlfriend, it was like, okay, we're letting you have a girlfriend, but that's still cute. But it's like, you can still make a lot of mistakes when you're at 21. So there was just no conversations that were being had. And then even going into the real world with finances, it's like me and my dad have those conversations now, but it's like, I got my first apartment on my own. I signed a stupid deal on my first apartment. When I got my first mortgage, I signed a horrible, interest deal that my parents were just like, you're adults, go make your decision. And I wasn't necessarily coming and asking them their opinion because we didn't really have that relationship at that time. That was never built. So it's like, I was buying a home on my own, getting my first car on a, interest rate that I shouldn't have. I was just falling into all those things myself.
Well, it's like we knew everything about the church, and we knew everything about like just basic God. Ethics and morals and how to follow God. That's what we had down. We had down that pat. Everything else in life, what the hell?
But you think about it like
how do I change a tire? I don't know.
Like the education system, and we always say like the education system has to evolve the way that like life is evolving, because how much geometry are you going to really use? Well, we're not going to go into education, but just saying like in the home, you're right. There has to be more than like, okay, you need to know the Bible. You need to know how to live like a Christian, but you need to know how to live like a Christian in every circumstance.
Yeah.
So the financials of it, how do you love your neighbor? How do you, how to be a Christian in the workplace? How to be a Christian in the school place?
How do you interact with the opposite sex?
All of that.
During the teenage years, this is when that should be happening.
But the communication of all of that stuff you have to be, from the very beginning, from the stages of Matthias and Thomas, building those types of communication, and then going into a place where you're at my kid's age, where you start doing things like the peek in the pit, because when you get into the car, just asking, how was your day? And they just say,
good,
fine. And you're realizing that doesn't work. Need to have it figure out how to communicate and how to pull that information from you and then communicate. One of the most important things I believe is disclosure, which is I have to show you how to be vulnerable. It comes from the parent, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of our the first thing we talked about when we sat down, which is how much of our lives do we show our kids, and we don't want to show them all of our marital problems, which I do think you still have to the kids should not be involved in your marital issues.
Yeah.
But there comes a point as the kids are progressing and as they're building those communication skills, we have to be the ones that lead with showing like, hey, look, I know what it's like to struggle in my walk as a Christian, because these are the things that I struggled with, and actually showing your kids that you're human and not this Christian super.
I think at whatever point that you start allowing your kids to date, that is when you have to start exposing them to the reality of marriages and relationships. Yeah. So every parent is different on when they're going to allow that. But whenever you allow that, that is when I think you have to start saying, you have a girlfriend. Have you guys had any fights at all? Oh yeah, we have a fight because me and your mom, we fought about that before.
Exactly.
And, you know, there was one time she, and you're going to hear a lot of nowadays is like in the future it's going to be like social media based and whatever. Sure. So you could be like, I remember one time your mom didn't like that, a woman DM'd me and we had an argument about it. Here's how we responded to it. And here's what and it's like, I mean, to me, everyone knows that I'm not. My parents didn't let me date, but they also didn't explain why I couldn't date. But I'm still definitely not a fan of teenagers dating or it being encouraged, because you're encouraging them to play house at that point.
Yeah,
and
you're
encouraging the fire to be flamed. You're basically turning the stove on and saying, you could put your hand over it. At some point, that heat is going to burn your hand. So, but I think whenever you as a parent decide that it's right, I think that, like to Caleb's point, I think that as you have kids, you should develop a system and environment where your kids can play with the opposite gender. So as of right now, and I'm not in that yet, but that is the rule that we'll have at our house is you can have girls and guys come over the house whenever, like they go swimming or they go play basketball. They're boys now. That's not, I mean,
but I'm just
it's not the same. But I'm saying when they're teenagers, because that's when people start stricting up rules. Yeah. Like I remember my parents thought it was cute when I was 8 that I was friends with a girl in the church. By the time I was 12, it was like,
you can't
that shouldn't happen. And that's what I'm talking about is it's this idea that, hey, our door is open. Our door is open, and as you build trust with me, that is where opportunities will begin to be afforded. As you lose trust with me, that's where I'll tighten. So we're going to start with the house. You can start bringing people of opposite gender in the house, not one friend. Yeah. You have friends over the house, and you need to be able to play, and you need to be able, and through that, they can see arguments and life, and you can help them walk through that. And then it's like, okay, now you could go to the mall because you have earned, to me, I've seen how you're interacting with them. I see what's going on when they're in the house. Yeah. Now you can go to the mall. Okay, well, now I heard something happen at the mall. So now we're going to peel back on that. And you're just balancing rather than it's all or nothing type of atmosphere. It's kind of like an inoculation,
like how vaccines work. It just has a little bit of, in order to inoculate to where if you've never experienced it, like you go into master's college, like all of these girls who were sheltered and then, boom, they weren't inoculated to the realities of what it's like to have a relationship with a person with an opposite sex, a healthy relationship in their teenage years. But I want to ask, can we get Ryan on? Because along this conversation connects with homeschooling, because this is the dilemma of homeschool.
One of our childhood friends, Ryan.
This is the dilemma of homeschool,
who I've known for 27 years.
When you homeschool your kids, are they too overly sheltered? Do they lack? Is that setting them up for failure as it pertains to social skills and interactions? Do they grow up weird and unable to kind of deal with life? And so that's the biggest criticism of homeschool. And homeschool right now is becoming way more popular because the school system is becoming more just corrupt. But I'm curious, because you were homeschooled your entire life. So explain
I blanked that out. I forgot you were homeschooled.
Yeah, explain that. We'll kind of connect it with what I just said.
Church. So that goes to Adam's process. So my parents pulled me out of public school after the 5th grade, and then from 6th grade all the way to 12th, I was homeschooled. And I was in the homeschool timeline when homeschooling was weird. Yeah. But obviously homeschooling's not that weird now with the day and age we live in. So when people find out that I'm homeschooled, they're like, well, how did you turn out? And to Pastor Adam's point, I lived just as much as at the church as you guys did. So I hung out with friends. I went to restaurants with you guys. There were a couple times.
Yeah, you had a social life.
I had a social life with you guys. So it wasn't to me. My bad. It wasn't to me too bad. It was because my parents did a good job of exposing me to friends of not only
community,
it was community,
and so social, and
so I didn't feel I lacked anything. Yeah. The areas I lacked are things that you guys touched on today about sex talks, and hey, this is how you're supposed to treat girls, and this is how you're supposed to treat yourself, and finances, money, all that stuff. But when it comes to social interaction, me and my wife talk about it all the time in the sense of I didn't lack it at all, and even outside of the church. I went to prom with my then girlfriend. I went to homecoming. I went to basketball games. I went to football games. while I was being homeschooled. So to me, it wasn't. I didn't miss anything at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good perspective. I mean,
I think a lot of times when there's homeschooling, but then there's still sports, there's still
church, whatever community,
any type of community, because that's really the only thing that really lacks when you take somebody out of the school system. Is that so? Because we've talked about it before. There's three pillars of school, which is the education, the career, and the social. And when you take the social out, then it kind of messes up with the education. But if you can supplement it, then it's absolutely an option.
So then I would ask this, Ryan, then were you the one that wanted to be the social, or were your parents forcing you to be the social? Because then that's where the conversation of the weird can come into play, because with with homeschooling, you can become isolated. No, I don't want to be around any friends. I'd rather just be in my room. I'd rather just be quiet. I'd rather just be at home. I'm a homebody, and I don't do the social just because I don't feel like it.
Yeah.
Or?
No, that's a really good question, because by nature, again, going off of what you guys experienced growing up, and I saw it growing up with you guys. I've been in your guys' life since I was 8 years old. I had to be at church. I had no choice.
Gotcha.
So, in essence, I remember being on at worship rehearsals, or when we had 4 services, we ran that little game room. If you weren't a who's who and you didn't know the secret knock, you couldn't get in to play Mario Party. But to even go off of what Sanaz said, when we would do the homeschool trips at like the LA County Fair, I would be amongst like hardcore religious homeschooled parents and kids, and I would look at them like, y'all are weird. And that's not what I was used to. I thought in my mind, what I was doing at home was the homeschool norm.
Gotcha.
Well, think about it in this sense. The reason that some of these parents are taking their kids out of school is because they don't want, they want to shelter them. You cannot shelter somebody for their entire life. That's not how life is. At some point, they're going to have to go and get a higher education or go get a job, and actually,
they're going to be like your friend.
Which friend is that?
That's what it
what?
The shot caller. Coyote Ugly.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's what
an hour and a half ago.
That's what it used to be in Ryan's age, though. But what it is nowadays is it's just the fact that a person can't afford private school because of their income, and they don't want their kid to be taught multiple genders. They don't want their kid to be taught the garbage. That's where the rise of homeschooling today. It's not coming from religious zealots per se. It's just people that said, if I can afford private school, I would, but I can't. So therefore,
isn't it different now?
Homeschooling is our only option.
Homeschool's different now
you
too.
Can do a lot.
You go to a
not always, but you go to a thing once or twice a week and stuff. But it's still, regardless, it's the same. But that is the conversation. The conversation is not amongst religious zealots who are trying to shield them from the world. It's the ones who are like, I just don't want them to learn these public school curriculums is what I don't want, and I can't put them in private school.
So then that puts more pressure, not more pressure, but then I guess I would say then it puts more expectation on the parent to make sure that their kid is social.
Yeah, you have to put those balances in place. Which is Caleb's point of asking that question, I think, of Ryan, but
it comes on the parent.
Yeah. What were we like when we were kids, Ryan?
Weird.
When we were teenagers, what were we like? What were me and Caleb like?
I can't say on camera. No, no, y'all like for like so
rule breaker. Clearly,
I mean, I've had the greatest memories growing up with you guys. I from abundant kids to abundant youth in Pomona, I tell stories, everything from the infamous gummy worm story, everything from the Coca-Cola factory. Now, for those of you who have heard the Coca-Cola factory story, I was there. I along with another person in this room, Mr. Caleb, we were the ones who narked, and I don't remember, Caleb, we were up on the grass and we saw Adam with the other, unknown, I'm not going to name them, people in there, and we're talking. I'm like, man, they're so dumb, blah, blah, blah. And then here comes 3 squad cars, and I'm like, oh, snap. And then me and Caleb come down and they're like, where are they at? And we look at each other. We look down Utica and we're both like, they're running over there.
So our church was right next door to a Coca-Cola factory. So we would often steal Coca-Colas from the fact we jump the fence and steal the Cokes, the free drinks that would be laid outside.
Free drinks.
So this behind the gate that you trespassed.
This particular moment was our last because that's where we got caught. They called the cops and we scrammed, but a couple of us got caught.
Yeah, but I mean, growing up with you guys were normal kids. I saw the curtain kind of being pulled like the Wizard of Oz because you guys were so down to earth. Me being a kid, even though you guys were pastors' kids, you guys were kids. You guys messed up. I saw your guys' struggles. I saw your shortcomings. I remember even at a very young age coming to you, Adam, with problems that I had. And I'm only a little bit older than you, but I remember being just so open, like, hey, man, I'm struggling. I don't know if you remember that one night in particular. We were in the children's room. I said, this is what I'm struggling with. Yeah. And just as you do now, literally 20 years later, you did then. You're like, Ryan, there's forgiveness, bro. Like, David screwed up and this and that and that. And, bro, I love you. We're here for you. And not realizing you were going through the same thing. But we were kids, but I still had community. And for any adult
and I think mainly for me, the only reason why I always bottled it up and I never did the opposite to anyone else is because I didn't want to be a disappointment to my dad. That was the only reason. And so I was wishing someone would respond to me the way that maybe I had gave it to you or anyone else, but I never trusted that information to anybody, you know, like until I got older and it was just part of my testimony, you know, it's like, and maybe I would nuance stuff when I was that age to relate to someone, but for the most part, my whole life was done completely in private. Like almost no one knew anything I did and it wasn't because I was like not ashamed. It was just, I didn't want to bring shame to him, to my dad. So it was like, oh, I'll just deal with it on my own, you know, and didn't really ever trust that to anyone or with anyone, you know.
So question to caveat off of that, you had mentioned earlier in your discussion that when you went to your dad with what happened at the school, do you think had you been so open with your dad at that age, even as young as you and I were, do you think your outlook on, man, I don't have to live up to the standard because I can just be me. Do you think that would have changed your perspective?
I mean, it would have radically changed my life in a lot of ways. If I now, do I think with my dad at that age, because my dad did a lot of growing too, and he went through cancer and stuff like that. So, would he have ever, if I offered that, because he had caught me dating and he was strict, man. He would have rules where I had to give him my phone at night and he'd read through it and all these things like that. I mean, it was just crazy rules. So I don't think he would have responded the same way when I was a teenager than what I told him when I was in my 20s. So that for sure, that reality wouldn't have changed. But let's just say if it was a different reality and the way he spoke to me at 22 was the way he would have spoke to me at 16, had I gone with him with some of these things, I mean, it would have changed my whole trajectory, because it changed my whole trajectory when you know, a lot of people know that Caleb is the one who led me to Christ. And the way he led me to Christ was because I had a girlfriend who had missed her period for 3 weeks. And I was going into my room to pack my bags because I was 3 months away from graduating high school. And I was like, if she's pregnant when I graduate, like, I'm out. Like, I don't want to embarrass my mom and dad. I don't want to be that kid who had a kid and all that kind of stuff like that. And so I'm passing by Caleb's room, 17 years old. I'm almost 18. He brings me in the room. He opens up to Romans chapter 2 to me. He shares with me that Christ died for my sins. And then Caleb said, for every time that you sin, you waste a drop of Jesus's blood. And then Caleb just basically said, and he didn't, I mean, that's why I always said Caleb has the gift of prophecy without him being into that kind of stuff. So, because he was prophetically speaking, but I was literally going to my room to pack my bags and leave and get ready. And then I was just going to kind of just, I don't know, figure it out. But that's how emotional I was. Caleb leads me to Christ in that moment. My life's radically changed because he talked to me in a way that no one else was, which is Christ's forgiveness is for you. Your sin you could give to Christ. You don't have to be perfect for God. And I mean, I heard that stuff on pulpit, but no one had pulled me aside and ever told me that, discipled me through that. I'd only ever heard it from someone on stage. and mostly from my dad, who I thought was like, was delivered by God from heaven. So it was like, well, of course that guy's gonna, And then he always preached very openly, but it was like not in a way that I understood at that age. So all this to say, when Caleb did that, I went in the room, I called a girl, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to stay home. I'm not going to come. And she's like, well, I got to tell you first, I just had my period. And I'm like, oh my, feel like heaven opened up at that time. I break up with the girl, so we just end it. And then my life radically changed. Like I start pursuing Christ. And then, that time in college, I went through that small stint of my flesh, but it was because I was in a 4-year relationship. I went through a bad breakup. It put me in a bad space. But for most of the time, that moment of just hearing God's grace in a way that I needed to hear, it changed my whole perspective. So to me, I'm like, how can I get my sons to understand God's grace at the youngest age possible? So that they realize, like, Dad's not expecting a perfect life of you, and neither is the Lord expecting a perfect life of you. No one ever told me that growing up. I would hear at an altar call, God's grace was for you, but it was like, God's grace is for unbelievers. It's not for you growing up in a Christian home. If you're in a Christian home, God hates you when you do your stuff that you do. It's like, there were always these degrees of separation that never was reality to me, which made it challenging for me. So, yeah.
Wow. That's deep.
All right. Anyone got anything else?
Do we got another clip, or
want to do
are
another
we
clip?
finishing up?
I mean, we're at about an hour and 40, so another clip would take probably like 2 hours.
Keep going, or we good?
All right.
No, we could double team. All that to say, we'll close with this thought. So I had this thought, and we'll play with it. I don't know for sure, but I think me and you talked about it. I think for Mother's Day coming up this year, we should have mine and your mom, but Mama Cindy, and then we should have our Grandma Pauline for Mother's Day, and then we'll open it up. What a lot of people don't know is when we originally built the set, we did leave it as an optional where we can change the set to bring an audience. So I think we should bring 30 moms in for an audience.
That is it.
And have them kind of submit questions ahead and stuff like that. And so then we'll fill this whole room with a studio audience. And only moms, have them sign up. You got to be moms for Mother's Day.
Wow.
And then I think for Father's Day, we'll bring in my dad and we'll bring in Grandpa, who's like a wild OG, from East LA.
That's gonna be fun.
You're going to have the bleeping thing on us.
And then we do an all fathers studio audience for that one. Idea. I think that would be dope, and we'll fill up this room. It'd be cool. Fire. So you're the first ones that have heard it. Come Mother's Day and Father's Day. We'll see how many people we can fit in this room, but maybe 30. So just get ready. We'll open up the signups when that comes. 30 mothers, 30 fathers, Mother's Day, Father's Day episodes. And then this year, we'll figure out other times that we're going to do some other studio audience stuff. We wanted to really save some studio audience stuff when we have like special guests and stuff like that. So
not us, but
no, I mean, you don't have to make
one of us.
Yeah, you don't have to make it about yourself, Sanaz. It's okay.
Yeah, you're a regular. Come on.
You're a regular contributor. You're like our CNN correspondent.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you guys.
Thanks
for jumping in, Ryan. Sweet T-shirt, by the way. What is that? Lightning?
Yeah. Just tell me why.
You were always the guy growing up that had all the Christian shirts too.
Well, it was always this is the most homeschool thing that I had.
He had all the Long's Christian bookstore shirts.
He had his car wrapped in Jesus.
Fish, and I had the fish everywhere in my focus. No, this is the not of this world. Someone asked me, they were like, man, I remember when you had that in high school. I said, yeah. And like this shirt is old, but it's in cherry condition.
I'll add this before we're done. I met Ryan. I never met Ryan, but when we were on Utica property, I always thought, because he was the first person he ever got on stage, and I was like, he has tattoos. He's a sinner and he's on stage. And he had this little baby Jesus fish tattoo. He had the fish tattoo. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been told all a lie. You can't be a Christian and have tattoos. Well, now obviously my arm is like blasted, but
your arm's blasted.
Got four.
Hey, Pastor Adam, you got some like ink on. Like, did someone Sharpie your left arm or something?
Yeah. So,
just a little bit.
I usually tell people that's why I got in prison.
But that was good.
All right, everybody. God bless you.
Have
a good day.